Let's do this. You are about to see 3 short clips from the popular cartoon SpongeBob SquarePants. As you watch, try to find the one theme that they all have in common. Ready?
Some people are even late on Sunday. Hi, Nailface!
Walking around on dry land. Let's keep going. And we've probably all wondered about this one. How can there be a beach underwater? This one completely defies logic. And although there are some semi-official explanations floating around out there, these answers are problematic at best. The most common explanation is that the water in Goo Lagoon is a different density than the water in Bikini Bottom, so they separate. Well, first of all, this does absolutely nothing to address the hundreds of other instances in SpongeBob where liquid can be seen in glasses, coming out of hoses, and even in pools. And even if Goo Lagoon is a different density, the 2 bodies of water are far too separate and clear-cut to be existing in contact with one another. There's just no good reason that explains why this beach, or any other liquids in Bikini Bottom, can feasibly exist. And look at this. Where did this river come from? And wait, what is that guy doing? What is he fishing for? He is a fish! How do you make sense of this? Well, consider this. What if Goo Lagoon, and all the other water you see in the show, is made of real, actual water, and everything else is just air? Yet again, this makes perfect sense. One more to consider. Okay, so the show is based around the idea of sentient sea creatures that understand language, wear clothes, and have created a functional society. Obviously, none of this exists in real life, so the viewers are asked to suspend our disbelief for a bit, and essentially just roll with it every time we watch. And that's fine and all. There's nothing wrong with rolling with an unusual premise if it means you'll enjoy the show more. But if we apply the costumed human hypothesis, this suspension of disbelief is no longer even necessary. There's no need to roll with it, because the show isn't scientifically inaccurate anymore. The fish have human characteristics because they are human beings, and it's that simple. Their underwater environment doesn't obey the natural laws of the ocean because they aren't underwater. Honestly, we could go on for hours about all the little inconsistencies that appear in this show. Everybody's noticed them. Just know that almost every logical problem you can find in SpongeBob SquarePants can be solved by applying some facet of skin theory. Anyway, if the show is entirely comprised of human beings dressed up like fish, they sure do a good job of hiding it, right? Other than those few instances we discussed earlier, you never actually see human beings, or anything else that positively indicates human beings exist in this world. Right?
Wrong!
There are actually 2 characters who have been sitting right under your nose the whole time, and the fact that they even exist at all is a huge argument to support the costumed human hypothesis. You have to know who I'm talking about.
Evil!
Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. How could we ever forget about these 2? They are literally human beings dressed up in costumes. Doesn't it strike you as a little coincidental that the only actual people we ever see in this show just happen to be wearing costumes? I mean, forget about all the subtle implications and the deep metatextual hints. The show is practically shoving the answer right in your face and daring you to connect the dots. Just think about it. None of the other sea creatures ever question what 2 elderly human beings are doing way down here in Bikini Bottom. They just roll with it. Also consider this. You never see them without their costumes on. Just like how you never see any of the other characters without their fish costumes on, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are constantly playing their roles. They're acting like something else. They're pretending to be something else. They are doing exactly what everyone else is doing. And that's why nobody in Bikini Bottom treats them any differently. Honestly, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy might as well be the poster boys for skin theory. You couldn't find better evidence if you tried. So in conclusion, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy aren't actually superheroes. They're just regular people in costumes, pretending to be superheroes. SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and literally everyone else in Bikini Bottom aren't actually fish. They're just regular people in costumes, pretending to be fish. And finally, the entire undersea setting of SpongeBob SquarePants is an elaborate illusion, and everything you see is actually occurring on dry land. Everything you know is a lie. So those are the current competing sub-theories. The show also might be utilizing a mix of all 3, so it's not necessary for you to pick a favorite. But after seeing this, you're probably left with a very bizarre sense of confusion, and a deep yearning for the answer to one simple question. Why? Why does this exist? If skin theory is true, why would the writers of a children's cartoon willingly choose to do this to their own show? Well, I didn't create SpongeBob, so I can't personally answer that. We can only interpret what we observe. But we can always speculate, and there's plenty to speculate about. So let's take a step back from the show itself, and talk about the real-world environment where it was born. If you watched the show growing up, you'd probably agree that the original 4 seasons of SpongeBob were its best. It would take a very long time, and probably a whole new video, to explain why those first few seasons were so good, but most people agree that the humor and the dialogue undergoes a significant tonal shift, sometime around season 4. Some would argue that the changes had already begun by the time season 4 came out, but for the most part, these episodes are still pretty solid. Maybe not up to the incredible standards of the first 3 seasons, but still not bad. So, what's so special about the first 4 seasons of SpongeBob? And why do almost all the instances of skin theory just happen to be found during the same 4 seasons when the show was at its critical peak? To answer this, we can only turn to one man. Him. No, not the pirate. I'm talking about him. This mouth. And the man who this mouth belongs to. Steven Hillenburg. Steven Hillenburg was the man who created SpongeBob SquarePants. He was a longtime animator and cartoonist, and before creating SpongeBob sometime around 1997, he previously worked with Nickelodeon as a creative director for Rocko's Modern Life from 1993 to 1996, another show known for its absurd and edgy humor.
Yeah, let's keep it that way! Boom! Oh dear, you alright? Yeah, I'm I mean... my neck! My leg! Ah!
But in addition to being a celebrated cartoonist, Hillenburg was also a teacher and a marine biologist who genuinely loved the ocean. So after coming up with the idea for SpongeBob and pitching it to Nickelodeon, he acted as head writer and executive producer on all 60 episodes from seasons 1, 2, and 3. He also worked on the SpongeBob movie, but then chose to depart from the show shortly afterwards in 2002. Following this departure, Hillenburg remained somewhat distant from the show, letting it change and grow in different ways under the creative control of his friend Paul Tibbitt. But then in 2014, it was reported that Hillenburg would be returning to SpongeBob SquarePants in a creative role, nearly a decade after leaving. This actually ended up coming true, and he directly worked on the production of SpongeBob's second feature-length movie, Sponge Out of Water. The movie was received very well by critics, and ultimately made many fans hopeful for what SpongeBob's future might hold. Meanwhile, if we look at the timelines, Hillenburg's tenure in charge of SpongeBob lines up perfectly with the show's golden age of seasons 1 through 3. And it follows that his unique creative input might have been the secret ingredient for making SpongeBob so good during those first few seasons. Coincidentally, his departure from the show also marked a sharp decline in the kind of bizarre instances we've been discussing, which all but stopped showing up after season 4. There may be occasional references to costumes and skins found throughout seasons 5 through 12, but these are usually far less complex and harder to find. So, was Steven Hillenburg really responsible for the creation of skin theory in SpongeBob? Before we can answer that, we have to know, was he even capable of devising such an elaborate and bizarre message? Absolutely. Just look at some of the traits that define SpongeBob's unique style of humor during those first few seasons. The show obviously used a lot of very simple visual gags, but there's also a lot of nuanced humor.
Louder! I'm ugly and I'm proud! Louder! I'm ugly and I'm proud! I'm ugly and I'm proud! I'm ugly and I'm proud!
Is that what he calls it?
Another trait that defined the show during those first few seasons was radical absurdity. Sometimes the humor would be pretty nonsensical, but then other times the show would veer wildly off course into these unbelievable, Kafka-esque tangents of experimental filmmaking.
I may finally have found a place where I can be all alone.
And lastly, we all know about the hidden adult themes in SpongeBob. Examples of this can be seen through some pretty simple double meanings and offhand comments.
Wow, I didn't think superpowers worked that way.
Sure, power's all in the costume. Why else would we run around in colored undies?
I can think of 3 good reasons.
But it can also be seen through highly complex, extended metaphors, which can transform the entire plot of an episode. One of the best examples of this can be seen in the season 1 episode Karate Choppers, which on the surface appears to be a pretty innocent story of 2 friends who enjoy practicing martial arts. But when you look at this episode a little closer, it actually transforms into a highly provocative and explicit parable of lust and abstinence. All this by simply substituting out a few words, and recognizing that every reference to karate is actually a clear reference to sex.
In fact, Stop! For a second, that sounded like karate right now. I mean, no! What is this karate?
Yeah, let that one sink in for a second. But despite all this, at the end of the day, SpongeBob SquarePants was a kid's show. But the difference was, Hillenburg didn't treat his audience like they were children. He gave them complex jokes. He gave them surreal, truly absurd humor, and he constantly pushed the envelope. This man was never afraid to go out on a limb, and if his jokes went right over the audience's head, so what? That makes it even funnier.
Nosferatu!
So could it be possible that Hillenburg and his team of writers intentionally created the complex hidden messages and references behind skin theory? I can think of no better candidate in the world. But unfortunately, there will never be any hard answers to these questions. In 2017, Steven Hillenburg was diagnosed with ALS, a neurological disease that affects motor function and muscular control. The news came as a shock, and he passed away shortly thereafter in November of 2018. The loss of Steven Hillenburg was felt by millions of people across the world who had grown up with his work. For many, this show played a greater role than anything else towards developing their sense of humor into what it is today. It gave us hilarious stories, heartfelt moments, and genuine happiness, far more than the simple cable entertainment we could have ever expected. Steven Hillenburg was the man to thank for all of this. And immediately, the outpouring of support and praises for this wonderful man's life showed just how far-reaching and positive of an impact he truly had. No matter how you judge a show, SpongeBob SquarePants will always be remembered as one of the greatest television experiences that has ever been aired. It's hilarious, it's quotable, it's relatable, it's emotional, it's deep. No cartoon has ever been able to bridge the gap between youth and adulthood quite like SpongeBob has, and no show probably ever will again. It's one of the only shows out there that's just as funny, if not even funnier, when you go back and rewatch it with age.
No, Patrick, mayonnaise is not an instrument.
Even on the 10th, the 20th, and the 100th viewing of these episodes, it's still just as good as it was when we tuned in and saw it premiere on Saturday morning. But now, the jokes that we never understood because we were too young suddenly become some of the greatest moments of all time. The little details that we never even noticed before can change our perception of an entire episode. And certain characters who we looked down on or laughed at as children suddenly become relatable and endearing. Just like the location of Bikini Bottom, somewhere below the waves off the Pacific coast, the care and attention that went into this show runs incredibly deep. A truly great show should never be pinned down by one official interpretation. It should always be challenged, reimagined, and redefined. Skin theory is only one of the fantastic ways that we can look at SpongeBob. So if you think that this whole theory is ridiculous, or maybe if you find it just a bit too disturbing,
That is really disturbing.
that's okay. You're allowed to see the show however you want, as long as this video starts a conversation, or maybe even inspires some older fans to sit down and rewatch their favorite episodes, then I consider that to be a huge success. So what do you think? Could it really be possible? And if Pandora's box has finally been opened on critical SpongeBob analysis, what unbelievable theory could come next? But no matter what new evidence is discovered, SpongeBob SquarePants